It's fizzy, it's fresh, it's low alcoholic. Historically, Piquette was what the winemakers and the field workers would drink. Back in the day, you didn't really have access to fresh water and people wanted to sip something while working the fields or at lunch. So they'd make Piquette. They had everything around. It's just made with the leftovers and re-fermenting that. So it costs nothing for the wineries to make. Looking to today, it's sustainable. You would have just thrown that out, composted those leftovers. That's why it's having a bit of a moment right now. So it's slightly sparkling, refreshing, very aromatic, very easy to drink.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 147. Are you curious about trendy new wines like pét-nats and Piquettes? Which lesser-known Croatian wines should you try? And what are comfort wines and what do you pair with them? You'll get those answers and more wine tips in part 2 of our chat with Kate Dingwall, who writes about food and drink for Forbes, Toronto Life, the Toronto Star, and Wine Enthusiast, among others. You don't need to have listened to part 1 last week before you listen to this one, but if you missed it, go back and take a listen after you hear this one. The interview portion today is a bit shorter than usual, so I'm including some bonus content on comfort wines at the end of this episode. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, links to both of my books, and how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/147. And just a side note, I will be hosting 2 very special wine tastings coming up. One's on October 21st. This is 2021, and it's going to be on scary good pairings for Halloween. It's going to be a mix of red, white, rosé, and sparkling wines, and desserts, of course, so that you get lots of great pairings for those Halloween treats, but also for savory snacks like pretzels and chips and so on. Lots of fun. And then on December 2nd, I'll be talking about holiday wines, whether it's for gift giving, entertaining, or pairing wines with different courses, your turkey dinner, your cranberry sauce, and so on. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's free. It's on Zoom, and you'll find the links for those tastings as well in the show notes. nataliemclean.com/147. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, my mother and I just binge-watched The Chair on Netflix, starring the wonderful Sandra Oh as the first woman of color to become chair of the English department at a fictional U.S. university. I absolutely love the inside look at academia, but even more, her caustic one-liners were just drop-dead funny. Sandra Oh's performance is so on point, as it is in several of my other favorite shows where she's the star, especially Killing Eve. Now, if only someone would make a series going behind the scenes of the wine writing world. Oh, wait, that's what I'm writing now with my memoir. Stay tuned. Okay, on with the show. As a sommelier, you're now engaging with more educated consumers. Did COVID or the lockdown change your physical wine list or inventory in certain ways, or not just at Dreyfus, but perhaps at other restaurants that you've noticed?
There has been major shipping delays due to COVID, due to the kind of entire supply chain. So I've seen a lot of restaurants, well, maybe things from Sicily are 6 months late, or champagne is a certain amount late, or so we're seeing kind of a shortage in wine almost across the country. Well, probably across the world from just general shipping delays. We're not getting things as quick as we can. We're not able to replenish lists as quick as we can.
And so how do you fill that gap?
That sometimes you have to look local or make other solutions. It's kind of you have to take it in stride and see what's available. There's not much we can do about a ship getting stuck in a canal around the world, which limits our champagne stock, etc. So kind of like everything has had to be over the last year, taking things in stride.
Absolutely. And I read where you wrote somewhere that sadly some restaurants that had fabulous deep lists of different vintages of particular wines had to sell some of that stock off just to stay in business. Were there many restaurants having to do that?
We saw that a lot in probably across North America at the beginning of the pandemic when everything was kind of in flux and no one knew how long this was going to last without in-person dining, and some restaurants weren't able to swap to takeout. We saw lots of restaurants selling off their cellars to be able to keep the lights on, which is a harrowing situation for them to have to go to. Although it was a very exciting opportunity for the home collector, because all of a sudden we have access to fantastic bottles that have either been sitting for years or were limited allocation in the first place. So you may have never even had the chance to own a bottle of that outside of drinking it at the restaurant. So if you're a collector, it was an absolute free-for-all. You probably were able to stock up on some fantastic bottles, but the restaurants, well, they did what they had to do to get through the last year.
Sure. And because consumers are more educated, has there been any pushback or commenting on prices? Because now they're very much aware of how much those bottles cost on the restaurant list and what the markup is.
I'm interested to see how that plays out. I think people are definitely aware of what things cost, although if you're curating your wine program smartly, you're maybe having limited allocation bottles that aren't available to the regular consumer. So people are excited and willing to pay for that. But I was thinking that recently, when I went out for a beer, I was like, I'm paying $12 for this beer, which I know costs $2 at the store. So that was a little, I guess I'm paying for the service, and I was happy to have that experience. But there's that awareness now. We had to buy all our own wines for the last year, so we know how much everything costs.
Right. Absolutely. And as they say, well, you probably know this adage, I've said it before, but customers will eat you poor and drink you rich. The margins are all in the beverages.
Exactly.
All right. So let's turn now to some trendy wines that you've written about. Tell us about pét-nat. Pét-nat wines. What are they? What does that stand for? And take it away. Let us know what those are.
Well, pét-nat you could consider like a young baby version of a champagne. Rather than the second round of fermentation happening outside of the bottle, pét-nat's bottled while it's undergoing that first round of fermentation. So all that.
Oh, so the first. So it's going to do the first and second in the bottle.
Yeah, so it all happens in bottle, which means it's very kind of unrefined. It's not as methodical a process as champagne, but it's very unrefined, loose, fresh. It's quite an exciting category because rather than stick to the kind of palate of champagne, those, Chardonnay, Meunier, Pinot Noir, Arbonne, winemakers are making pét-nat out of everything. So we're seeing sparkling happen across the board, any grape varietal you can ever imagine. It's a very kind of low effort wine. I love popping one open like at a dinner party on a hot summer night. It's not something you want to think too deeply about. It's not something you want to overly criticize. It's just fun, fresh, very affordable. I would never pay over maybe $25 for a bottle of pét-nat, but it's very fun. Over the last year of the stress we had, it's a wonderful kind of low effort option.
Huh, okay, and it stands for pétillant naturel, or the natural ancestral method or something like that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, pétillant naturel.
Okay, there we go. And do most wine regions make these pét-nats, or are they really mostly focused in wine regions that would do sparkling wines normally?
You're seeing them out of really everywhere. The style has been made, similar style has been made in Gaillac, so forever, for decades and decades and decades now, but it's...
Sorry, where is Gaillac?
South of France.
Okay.
It's one of the more historic, wine regions down at the bottom of, I believe we're right south of Bordeaux there.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've seen kind of similar styles been made for decades, but it's kind of come to a bit, the category has really had a little bit of a moment over the last maybe decade, and we're seeing pét-nats pop up everywhere. North America's having a big moment with it, but I've had some really fantastic ones out of Oregon, out of the Finger Lakes regions as well. Ontario has a few producers.
Who would you recommend in Canada and the US? Just a couple of winery names that come to mind.
I love the Marini. It's a project out of Oregon, I believe. Beautiful, like dark red pét-nats, like a lot of kind of texture and character to them. Trail Estates has one that's always really fun out of Ontario as well. And Trainer, out in the county, has some fun options. Very low effort, affordable bottles. Great introductory to the category.
Oh, that's great. And you were saying earlier, the first fermentation happens inside the bottle. Are there actually two fermentations or just one, and that first one takes place inside the bottle?
I believe it's just the one.
Just the one. Okay, great. So therefore, they're not disgorging all the dead yeast cells. So there's lots of little floaty bits in these things, are there?
Lots of floaty bits.
Okay. And nothing to be afraid of. That's the stuffing. That's the taste. I always say it's kind of like the pan where you're trying to get the last bits of fat or onion after you've been frying. It's all the umami and the flavor is in the floaty bits.
Yeah, exactly. Adds texture.
Yeah, exactly. And so are they usually closed with what do they call it? A crown cap versus a mushroom cork as well?
Yeah, usually crown cap. These are very much not meant for aging.
Okay.
So they don't really need that cork.
Okay. Let's talk about another wine that's new and trendy. I believe it's a still wine. I haven't written about either of these two yet, so I'm relying on you and asking very basic questions here, Kate. But what is Piquette?
So Piquette's actually another one having a moment right now. It's a low ABV. I don't even know if you can technically call it wine because it's so low alcohol. It's made by re-fermenting the extra kind of dredges and pomace of that winemaking process. So all the seeds, the skins, and the pulp that's left after the juice has been pressed. So you're re-fermenting that. It's fizzy, it's fresh, it's low alcoholic. Historically, Piquette was what the winemakers and the field workers would drink. Back in the day, you didn't really have access to fresh water and people wanted to sip something while working the fields or at lunch. So they'd make Piquette. They had everything around. It's just made with the leftovers and re-fermenting that. So it costs nothing for the wineries to make. Looking to kind of today, it's sustainable. You would have just thrown that out, composted those leftovers. So I think that's why it's having a bit of a moment right now. So it's slightly sparkling, refreshing, very aromatic, very easy to drink.
Huh. Kind of like nose to tail cooking, using all the parts of the wine.
Exactly. One of a winemaker I really like, Martha Stuman out in California, actually was saying that yesterday their compost bin didn't arrive in time. So she's like, I guess we'll make some Piquette rather than throw everything out.
That's great. And so it's the grapes and the skins and the leftovers. Wouldn't that make the wine taste a little bitter?
Redtail out in the county sweetens theirs, but no, it's just not very concentrated. It's just like light and refreshing. So it's not as concentrated as you would get. So not really bitter.
Okay. And so alcohol-wise, would it clock in around, 5-6%, or what would it be?
It depends on the producer, anywhere between 3 and 10.
Oh, okay. Okay. But it's definitely lower than average table wines of 12 to 14%. So that is refreshing.
It is nice if you're kind of conscious of your consumption or if you're drinking during the day. It's a really nice alternative.
Awesome. So let's talk about your tasting process. Your home must be filled with wine bottles. How do you approach tasting wine with all the samples and things that you must receive?
I kind of try and mark a day in my week where I do everything at once, just so I can have kind of comparative options. I try and do things with friends as well. My partner doesn't drink, so I'll usually drink with friends, and I love to have another palate weigh in on things just to remove any bias I may have. So I try and kind of have friends also in my wine circle try things.
And do you, just process-wise, do you taste whites first, then reds, or do you reverse those, or are there any sort of approaches you use?
I try and group everything together. So if I need to look at whites, I'll try and just do all the whites in the one day and reds in another.
Okay, great. Yeah, that is good for comparison. Do you ever find it hard to turn off the critical mind when you're drinking wine, like just even for pleasure?
Absolutely. I was with one of my friends last night and he's making wine. And I honestly thought it would be a lot worse what it was, but immediately my mind goes to like, oh, da 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 da, like going through my own tasting notes. So it's definitely hard to turn off sometimes, but I can do it.
Well, that's good. So let's just do some sort of quick answers, lightning round. Is there something that you believe about wine that there might be others who would disagree with you on that point?
One of my dear family friends is a firm believer that he will only drink old world wine. So we've had a continuous conversation where I bring bottles from a region that isn't France to try and get him interested. We're still going back and forth on this. I haven't really had a win on that one, but
Okay.
I'm definitely excited about we've continued to have that kind of new world versus old world discussion.
Oh, that's good. Keep trying.
I'm trying.
Do you have a favorite childhood food that you love that today you might enjoy, and which wine would you pair with it?
Growing up, I loved shrimp chips.
Oh, shrimp chips.
Bags and bags and bags of them. So today, still on a Sunday night, if I'm kind of watching movies, I'll get in my pajamas and open a bag. And I really love pairing them now with like a super oxidative Jura white.
Oh,
it just
wow.
works really well and balances out that kind of like shrimpy umami natures.
Oh, that's great. Durell White, is that the name of the winery or a region?
Jura.
Oh, Jura, sorry. Didn't pick it up. Okay, Jura in France, right?
In France.
Yeah, okay. And shrimp chips, I've never heard of those. I'm going to have to look for those.
Yeah,
That sounds
like a big
delicious.
staple.
Cool. What's the weirdest wine pairing you've ever had?
I was in China, Macau for work a few years back, and we were doing a big hot pot dinner with some friends there, and they insisted on pairing everything with like Blanc de Blanc champagne. And I was like, that's a really weird move, but it worked so well. It cut through all like the fattiness and the richness so perfectly, and I now am such an advocate, for champagne, bubbles with everything, but that was a really nice one.
Oh, awesome. There wasn't any that did not work, like any of their dishes that did not work with Blanc de Blanc?
It worked really well through everything. It was nice. We got everything, a full spread of it, and it just worked so well through everything we were throwing in that hot pot.
Oh, wow. And Blanc de Blanc, just for those who are listening who may not know, is white wine made from white grapes. So usually, if we're talking champagne, it's 100% Chardonnay grapes. Okay, and so do you have a memorable wine that you were ever given as a gift?
Back to that Piquette story, I was going on to travel throughout Europe for a couple different trips, so I wasn't able to bring any wine home. I just had so many internal flights, it would have ended up costing me a hilarious amount of money to bring wine home through checking bags, so I wasn't able to bring any home. So I had a friend recently find me a bottle from that winery I had mentioned earlier, a bottle of cava from them, and managed to track one down and gave it to me for my birthday, and I was very excited.
How nice. Very thoughtful. What is your favorite wine that probably few of us have ever heard of?
I've been really loving Scarlet recently from Croatia, refreshing and bright, but it takes on skin contact really well too. It gets this really beautiful herbaceous, like salty, like savory nature to it when it sits on the skins for an extended period of time. So does both things very well.
Oh, wow. And is that Scarlet, did you say?
Scarlet, Skrlet, out of Croatia.
Okay, and that's the name of a grape?
It's the name of a grape.
Okay, there you go. And what would you pair with it?
Seafood. Like
okay.
Croatia is a big seafood
Naturally.
capital, so what grows together goes together. I've also been really
Absolutely.
liking Mostarda too, out of Spain, like a really kind of trousseau, but not at a trousseau price. Silky, light red, nice for kind of like these in between late summer days.
And what do you mean by trousseau?
It is the Spanish version of trousseau.
Okay. Yeah, great. Do you have a favorite wine book?
I really loved Italian Wine Grapes by Ian DeGatta. It's a massive honking book. Like there's so many beautiful stories about producers, grapes. It's something you can continue reading for years and years and years and always find some new information outside of.
Mm-hmm. And he's a marvelous writer. He's also a doctor by training and a Canadian. Yay!
Canadian, I know. There's that nice little connection.
You find them everywhere you go, Kate. If you could share a bottle of wine with anyone, living or dead, who would that be and which wine would you share?
Ooh, I think Salvador Dali.
Ooh,
I'm not
the
sure if
artist.
you're familiar with this, but he has a series of wine and cookbooks, and they're absolutely wild. He's written an entire book on wine, which not a lot of people know of. I have the cookbook. I have not been able to track down the wine book, and it's just fascinating.
Oh, there it is.
It's really, really interesting. So I'd let him bring the wine because he clearly knows some stuff. But yeah, he has just very odd Salvador Dali-esque recipes. It's a very fascinating read, and I'd love to hear what he has to say about wine.
So Salvador Dali, he was, I don't know if you call him abstract, but he had the sort of melting clocks and things, right?
Surrealist, yeah.
Surrealist, there you go. There's your art background. And where was he from? Was it Spain?
I believe so.
Okay. Interesting. I'll have to look for that book. All right. And if you could be any wine, Kate, which wine would you be? And why?
Probably some sort of sparkling pét-nat. I'm very bubbly, so...
Yes. Perfect. That's a great choice.
Fit the bill.
And not to be a downer or anything, but I always find this an interesting question. Which wine would you like to be served at your funeral? Which is a long time from now.
Yes, long time. I want bubbles in everyone's hand. I'm in the camp, and funerals should be a place of celebration of life. So I want everyone drinking bubbles.
Awesome. And what's one wine tip you could share with us now? Something for us to try this week? Piece of wine advice you find useful or helpful?
I'd kind of maybe back on that like Bastarda Trousseau situation, I'd kind of look at where grapes are produced outside the region. Like you can get some really beautiful kind of Trousseaus outside of Jura or traditional Trousseau areas. So just think about regions. Think about where wines are made and think about kind of different where new wines are made.
Yeah, great. Terrific. All right. Well, this has been fabulous. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention, Kate?
No, I think we've had a really kind of interesting chat. It was an absolute pleasure to finally get to meet you and finally chat through wine.
Absolutely, Kate. This has been wonderful. Where can people find you online?
My website, kate-dingwall.com, is a great place to kind of read through some of my old work, and will direct you to my social media as well, which is at my name. Very creative.
At Kate Dingwall. And so your website, kate-dingwall.com.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. I really appreciate this. Some great stories and tips. Can't wait to chat with you again soon.
I know. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Kate Dingwall. Here are my top takeaways. Number 1, Kate gave a great overview of trendy new wines like pét-nats and Piquettes. I also enjoyed her take on Croatian wines to try. Number 2, restaurant lists and wine service are really changing post-pandemic, from reduced selection because the restaurants had to sell off their cellars, to more educated consumers who know what they want and have experienced ordering wine directly online. And 3, I loved her suggestions for weird wine pairings and look forward to trying those shrimp chips. Weird. Since this is a shorter interview than usual, I'm going to chat now about comfort wines. Finally, I had the assignment that would give full vent to my scientific mind to define and recommend fall comfort wines that would suit fall comfort activities. The research would be vast. A breakthrough in this field would be bigger than cold fusion. I could envision my glorious future publishing my seminal book on comfort wines, with a foreword by Dr. Serge Renaud, the famous French scientist whose French paradox studies established some of wine's health benefits. Snapping out of my reverie, I went down to my laboratory, the wine cellar, to begin investigation. The hypothesis to prove first was whether or not there were wines that were not comfort wines. After some experimentation, I concluded there were no uncomfortable wines, or wines for discomfort, since I found them all of great comfort, which itself was discomfiting. How would I narrow the field? Next, I turned to the previous papers put forward in the comfort wine research community with titles such as The Wines of Winter and What to Drink When the Temperature Drops, and the incisive Warm Tipples for Cold Nipples. Leafing through these articles, I spotted several hypotheses that had to be explored before reaching firm conclusions. The first was that it seemed all fall wines were best consumed while chatting with friends in cable knit sweaters by crackling fires with Irish setters at your feet. The repeated references to these prerequisites could not simply be a coincidence or a collective lack of imagination. So I decided to simulate this first fall comfort activity. Since I had dropped all science courses in grade 12, choosing to take more marketable courses such as Russian literature and comparative world religions, my scientific method was admittedly a bit rusty. I ended co-opting a couple of neighbors who were raking leaves outside. After insisting they first go home and put on snuggly sweaters, we all sat glowing radiantly in front of the fireplace. The temperature in the house was already 29 degrees, and the fire's heat started to blast us in waves not unlike those in the movie Backdraft. While I poured, I explained that we were searching for wines that were familiar to us, as often we turn to the familiar for comfort. I also mentioned that these wines wouldn't be described as intellectual, nor would they have aromas of wet violets. Yet they were not bland or unchallenging. They resonated with deep, warm layers of fruit. My neighbors looked at me with curiosity, but they were appreciative of the free drinks. We found a number of wines fitting this description, especially those from Australia, where several regions of warm climate results in concentrated wines with lots of fruit. By this time, we had peeled off our layers down to our t-shirts, but were finding great comfort in the wines. Thus, my first hypothesis was proven. Fleshy, ripe wines from Australia can be considered fall comfort wines, whether you're wearing a Lopi sweater or not. And a fluffy cat is an adequate substitute in the absence of an Irish setter. After the neighbors trooped off, I placed a bottle of Valpolicella, the quintessential easy drinking wine from Italy, on the table. My next hypothesis to prove was that not all comfort wines have to be heavily extracted with high alcohol, especially when you want to sip them over an entire evening, the fall equivalent of quaffing on the patio in the summer. I concentrated on the bottle and whispered my observations into a small dictaphone. Which fall comfort activity would best suit sipping the wine? I became unsettled with the strangeness of this activity, so I decided to call the local newspaper's movie critic, whom I do not know, but who happened to answer his phone that day. I wanted to get a movie recommendation. Turns out he likes Il Postino, the postman. A happy coincidence, since I happened to be tasting a northern Italian red. These wines complemented the film's warmth and intimacy with their rounded flavors of black cherries and plums and a smoky finish. My second hypothesis was correct. Low alcohol wines are suitable comfort wines, and the bonus is that you do not end up believing yourself to be a minor character in the movie. Next, I started wandering around the house in search of more comfort activities. My eyes glazed over, looking at the books on the shelves. Again, I decided to call someone I didn't know, especially since one is always better turning to experts for leisure matters. The reason why wine writers are spreading faster than phylloxera. A local bookstore owner suggested 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which follows several generations of a Latin American family. Time to test my third hypothesis. Anyone can pair wine with food, but only those with too much time on their hands try to pair wine with literature. To do this, I searched for wines that were made in South America by several generations of the same family, preferably from the small northern Colombian village called Macondo, the novel's setting. However, after several hours of scouring the shelves at the local liquor store, a product consultant was kind enough to tell me the village was fictional and gently pointed me in the direction of Chilean wines. I picked up several Chilean reds, hoping to find aromas that would trigger the novel's subtext, like Marcel Proust's memory-enhancing Madeleine. They didn't help with the textual analysis, but they did have a supple texture with lots of ripe fruit. Though I was feeling pretty pleased with myself by this time, I had to press on in the name of science. There was one last hypothesis to be tested. whether Merlot was the only wine mellow enough for jazz music. A staff member at the local music store answered my phone and suggested I listen to All For You, a dedication to the Nat King Cole Trio by British Columbia native Diana Krall. Krall's music called for something lush to complement the singer's sultry voice, so I started with a Merlot. And it worked. But could a Cab or a Zin be equally jazzy? Turns out they went just fine too. I even tried a little fizz with my Frim Fram sauce, some sparkling wines from California, BC, and Ontario. I knew now I had just opened up new vistas of Venus possibility for jazz lovers. After a long day in the laboratory, it was time to write up my findings. I had discovered that while there are no uncomfortable wines, there are certainly those that work especially well when you want something warmly familiar. But don't take my word for it. Prove it to yourself. So that's my tongue-in-cheek take on a topic that seems to come up every fall. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. In the show notes, you'll find a link to the full transcript of my conversation with Kate, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, links to both of my books, and where you can find me on Zoom, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. And that's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/147. And don't forget about those extra special tastings coming up. Save your spot soon for Scary Good Pairings on October 21st and holiday hosting and gifting on December 2nd. Next week, you won't want to miss our chat with the witty and wise Elizabeth Schneider, host of the Wine for Normal People podcast. In the meantime, if you missed episode 38, go back and take a listen. I chat about Getting Hammered, a wine auction guide to survival, especially since many auctions take place in the fall. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite. Wine auctions are about more than investing or collecting, or even fundraising. Smelling and sipping your wine may satisfy your civilized nature, but only hunting and competing for a bottle can quiet those deeper atavistic urges. It's the difference between buying frozen cutlets at the grocery store and tracking your kill on the Serengeti. I'm out for big game tonight. I laser a shaft of concentration between the auctioneer and me. My hand becomes a pack animal with which I hunt side by side, rising and falling. A hot primal fluid swells up into my reptile brain, willing me to snatch that bottle and run it back to my lair. If you liked this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the tips Kate shared or in the whole scientific field of comfort wines. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a comfort wine. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.